The year is 1849. The western frontier lies before them like an endless, restless sea, a land where the grass sways high enough to hide a man, and the woods hum with whispers older than the first settlers. This is a place of raw beauty and hidden danger, where every step forward is a step deeper into the unknown. The West in this time is not a dream, it is a test. A test of muscle, grit, and unshakable will. It is a place where a wrong turn can mean a shallow grave, and where the law is not written in ink, but carved in the edge of a blade, and along one dusty trail, beneath a sky stretched wide and heavy with summer heat, rides Elias Hart, a man of 39. His face is worn by years of wind and hardship. His eyes, the color of weathered steel, scan the horizon like they've learned to expect trouble. The wagon he drives creaks and groans, pulled by two tired mules. And in the shadowed back of that wagon, wrapped in a threadbare quilt, sits Clara. She is 12 years old, small, with pale cheeks touched by the sun and hair the color of chestnuts after rain. The others in the wagon train think she is Elias's daughter, a mistake either of them corrects. The truth is, Clara is his niece. Her parents, Elias's younger brother and his wife, died swiftly in a fever that swept through their small settlement months before. By the time Elias arrived, only Clara remained. And from that moment on, she clung to him like a lifeline. Here on the frontier, family is not always defined by blood. Survival makes its own rules. And sometimes those rules are written in silence. The wagon train they travel with is a ragged mix: farmers, trappers, widows, and dreamers chasing whispers of gold and fresh land. The road ahead leads toward the Kentucky Highlands, a place spoken of in campfire talk with a strange blend of awe and fear. The hills there are said to be rich in coal, their forests thick with deer, their rivers teeming with fish. But they are also home to shadows, to people who have lived on that land long before a white man's boot touched the soil, and to men who enforce their own justice far from the reach of any sheriff. The days are long. The sun beats down. Every morning, the travelers wake to the smell of damp earth and wood smoke, breaking camp before the first pink light of dawn fades from the horizon. At night, the fires burn low, and the cries of wolves echo through the valleys. Clara rarely speaks in those early weeks. She sits near Elias during meals, her gaze darting like a startled bird whenever strangers approach. She knows she belongs to no one but him now, and she guards that bond fiercely. Elias, for his part, is a quiet man. His words are measured, his expression unreadable. But there are moments, fleeting as the wind, when his hand will rest on her shoulder just a second longer than needed. When his gaze lingers. When he speaks her name in a tone softer than the rest of his speech. It is not yet spoken, not yet named. But between them, something is shifting. The frontier is an endless stage, one of isolation and reinvention. Here, people become what they need to be in order to survive. And as the wagon wheels grind over rock and root, Clara is not just the girl Elias saved. She is becoming something else entirely. By the time they reach the highlands, the air will be colder, the nights longer, and the choices far more dangerous. In this untamed land, the line between family and something more will blur, and once crossed, there will be no turning back. The frontier does not forgive. And neither will the heart. The hollow was a cradle of earth, hidden between two towering ridges, its slopes heavy with pines and its floor a patchwork of wild grass and rocky soil. Here, in this pocket of the world untouched by maps, Elias chose to stake his claim. His hands, thick with calluses, shaped each log, each notch, each beam of the home they built together. The sound of his axe echoed through the valley, steady as a heartbeat, until the cabin stood against the wind like a fortress of timber. Clara was still young then, though her eyes carried the sharpness of someone who'd seen too much too early. She learned the ways of survival not from books or gentle instruction, but from necessity. At dawn, she would bend over the milk pail, the goats shifting nervously beside her. By noon, she might be found splitting kindling, her small frame swinging the hatchet with a precision born from repetition. And at dusk, when the shadow of the ridges swallowed the hollow hole, she would sit on the porch with a rifle balanced across her knees, her gaze scanning the tree line. Elias watched her closely. Always. Some would say protectively, others might sense something deeper, something unspoken. Out here, far from the churches and the courts, the rules of society loosen like an untied rope. A man's law was the only law, and Elias's word was the only one that mattered. The dangers of the frontier were many. Bands of wanderers drifted through, men with eyes that lingered too long and hands that wandered even further. Wolves sang their hunger into the night air, their howls weaving through the pines until they felt almost human. And the winters were merciless, the snows stacking high against the door, the cold seeping into the marrow of their bones. Years passed like this. The calendar pages were never turned. There was no calendar at all. Clara grew tall, her limbs filling out with the grace of youth, her hair deepening into the rich brown of chestnut bark. Her storm-gray eyes, once wide with innocence, now held a knowing steadiness, the kind that came from watching seasons change without ever seeing a crowd, a marketplace, or a dance hall. The age between them, once a gulf, became something harder to define. Out here, time did not separate them as the world beyond might have demanded. There were no neighbors to whisper, no preacher to frown. Just the wind in the trees, the rhythm of chores, the slow weaving of two lives into one dot, and so the frontier, with its silence and its solitude, shaped them both. It bound them in ways neither could have anticipated, ways that blurred the lines of family and the roles society had written for them. For Clara, Elias was protector, teacher, and something more, though neither spoke it aloud. In this isolated hollow, they were all the other had, and all the other needed. Whispers in the hollow by the winter of 1854, the hollow lay deep in snow, silent except for the wind as it curled around the eaves of the cabin. It had been 6 years since Clara first came to Elias's homestead, a frightened girl clutching the memory of a world she no longer knew. Now she was 18, her face no longer that of a child but of a young woman hardened by the trials of the wilderness. The hollow kept its secrets well. Here, the trees rose high and thick, their bare branches clawing at the pale winter sky. No road reached this far, no preacher's voice carried over the hills, and no neighbor's window looked toward the cabin. Only Elias and Clara lived here, their days shaped by the rhythm of survival, splitting wood, carrying water, hunting game when the snow allowed it.to the few travelers who braved the old trail and stopped for warmth or food. Clara spoke of Elias as Pa. She served them stew by the fire, her voice calm and polite, her eyes lowered the way she had been taught. But in the long, dim evenings when the cabin door was barred against the cold, and the oil lamp cast its golden light, something different passed between them. Her gaze would linger too long. A brush of the hand over his when passing him bread seemed to carry a weight neither spoke of. Elias, now in his late 30s, had been shaped by years of toil, by loss, by the isolation of the land. He knew the world beyond the hollow carried laws and morals, whispered by churches and written into books he had long since stopped reading. But here, there was no one to remind him, no one to see. The frontier was a place where the rules of civilization thinned and sometimes disappeared entirely. As the winter deepened, the snow piled high against the walls of the cabin, shutting them off entirely from the world. Days blurred into weeks. The fire became their constant companion, crackling between them as they sat close for warmth. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. Inside, the air between them grew taut, like a rope drawn too tight. Clara had learned to read his silences. She could tell when he was brooding over the past, or when his thoughts were far from the cabin. She noticed when his hand lingered too long on hers, when his eyes moved over her in a way they never had before. And though she knew this path was dangerous, though some quiet, inherited voice in her mind whispered of shame and sin. She did not look away. One night, the wind screamed against the shutters and the cold seemed to seep even through the thick quilts on their bed. Elias sat in his chair, staring into the flames. Clara crossed the room and stood behind him, her hand lightly on his shoulder. He did not move, but she could feel the tension in him. The war between the man he had been and the man the frontier was making him into. In the hollow, the forest pressed in like a living wall. Snow muffled every sound. No one came, no one would. Whatever happened here would be theirs alone to carry. By the thaw of spring, something unspoken had shifted. They worked side by side in the small field, turning the earth for planting. To any passer-by, they might have seemed simply father and daughter, bound by necessity. But beneath the quiet nods and the daily chores there was a current, a dangerous understanding, and it bound them tighter than blood. The hollow had claimed them both. And in that isolation, boundaries blurred, and love became something the outside world would never name. The year is 1854. The frontier is a vast, untamed wilderness, stretching farther than the eye can see. Here, life is harsh, survival is a daily battle, and the line between civilization and the wild is razor thin. Families carve their existence from the earth, planting corn, raising livestock, and praying that the harsh elements will not claim them. Amid this unforgiving landscape, a story unfolds, one of love, loyalty, and a bond that defies the very rules of society. Spring arrives like a quiet miracle. The land awakens with a riot of green, corn shoots breaking through the soil, wildflowers blooming along river banks. Clara, a young woman hardened by the struggles of frontier life, bends over the freshly turned earth. Her hands, callous yet gentle, brush against the rich soil as she plants the future of her family. It is in this quiet labor that a forbidden connection begins to take root. Elias, her protector, her friend, and the man who saved her from a fate that might have been far crueler, works alongside her. Their hands touch, a brief contact, but neither pulls away. There is an unspoken understanding, a spark igniting that both frightens and enthralls them. That night, the world feels impossibly vast, yet impossibly small. The stars stretch above them like a cathedral of light, silent witnesses to a moment that will change everything. Elias takes Clara's hand, not with the ease of familiarity, but with the tremor of something forbidden, and then, for the first time, their lips meet. It is hesitant, delicate, a kiss that tastes of guilt, longing, and the harsh reality of a world that would never condone this bond. They pull away, breathless, hearts hammering, not just from desire, but from the knowledge that they have crossed a line from which there is no return. Elias tells himself it is love, forged in hardship and survival. Clara tells herself it is destiny, written in the moment he chose to protect her when no one else would. Yet both understand the danger of their connection. Society, morality, even family, all would reject this union. And yet, the heart does not obey rules or reason. Days pass. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every shared smile becomes a stolen treasure. In the isolation of the frontier, where every misfortune can be fatal, love is both a comfort and a risk. Theirs is a love that exists in whispers and hidden touches, a delicate thread spun in the shadows of a world that would condemn it. But the frontier teaches a harsh truth. Life is fleeting, and moments of happiness must be seized, even if the cost is a lifetime of scandal and shame. Theirs is a story of survival, of loyalty, of a bond that defies convention. Clara and Elias are more than family now. They are lovers, bound not just by blood, but by choice, by need, and by a destiny written in the stars above the frontier. In the wilderness, where the law of the land is as unforgiving as the land itself, love becomes a rebellion. And in that rebellion, Clara and Elias find a freedom that the civilized world could never offer. But freedom comes at a price, and every stolen moment in the wild carries a shadow, a warning that not all bonds are meant to be broken, or obey. Season 5 of this tale has only just begun. On the frontier, the heart is both weapon and refuge, and every choice carves a new path into the unknown. The year is 1854. The frontier is a vast, untamed wilderness, stretching farther than the eye can see. Here, life is harsh, survival is a daily battle, and the line between civilization and the wild is razor thin. Families carve their existence from the earth, planting corn, raising livestock, and praying that the harsh elements will not claim them. Amid this unforgiving landscape, a story unfolds, one of love, loyalty, and a bond that defies the very rules of society. Spring arrives like a quiet miracle. The land awakens with a riot of green, corn shoots breaking through the soil, wildflowers blooming along riverbanks. Clara, a young woman hardened by the struggles of frontier life, bends over the freshly turned earth. Her hands, callous yet gentle, brush against the rich soil as she plants the future of her family. It is in this quiet labor that a forbidden connection begins to take root. Elias, her protector, her friend, and the man who saved her from a fate that might have been far crueler, works alongside her. Their hands touch, a brief contact, but neither pulls away. There is an unspoken understanding, a spark igniting that both frightens and enthralls them. That night, the world feels impossibly vast, yet impossibly small. The stars stretch above them like a cathedral of light, silent witnesses to a moment that will change everything. Elias takes Clara's hand, not with the ease of familiarity, but with the tremor of something forbidden. And then, for the first time, their lips meet. It is hesitant, delicate, a kiss that tastes of guilt, longing, and the harsh reality of a world that would never condone this bond. They pull away, breathless, hearts hammering, not just from desire, but from the knowledge that they have crossed a line from which there is no return. Elias tells himself it is love, forged in hardship and survival. Clara tells herself it is destiny, written in the moment he chose to protect her when no one else would. Yet both understand the danger of their connection. Society, morality, even family, all would reject this union. And yet, the heart does not obey rules or reason. Days pass. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every shared smile becomes a stolen treasure. In the isolation of the frontier, where every misfortune can be fatal, love is both a comfort and a risk. Theirs is a love that exists in whispers and hidden touches, a delicate thread spun in the shadows of a world that would condemn it. But the frontier teaches a harsh truth. Life is fleeting, and moments of happiness must be seized, even if the cost is a lifetime of scandal and shame. Theirs is a story of survival, of loyalty, of a bond that defies convention. Clara and Elias are more than family now. They are lovers, bound not just by blood, but by choice, by need, and by a destiny written in the stars above the frontier. In the wilderness, where the law of the land is as unforgiving as the land itself, love becomes a rebellion. And in that rebellion, Clara and Elias find a freedom that the civilized world could never offer. But freedom comes at a price, and every stolen moment in the wild carries a shadow, a warning that not all bonds are meant to be broken, or obey. Season 5 of this tale has only just begun. On the frontier, the heart is both weapon and refuge, and every choice carves a new path into the unknown. The year is 1865. The American frontier stretches endlessly, a tapestry of wild forests, untamed rivers, and golden plains that seem to have no end. It is a land of opportunity, but also a land of isolation, where settlers cling to survival and the fragile thread of human connection. Here, society's rules seem distant, yet their shadows loom over every cabin, every hearth, every heart. Today, we tell a story whispered only in the quiet corners of frontier history, a story of forbidden bonds, love, and the blurred line between family and desire. This is the story of Clara and Elias. Clara had arrived on the frontier as a young girl, her world confined to the dense woods and the small, weathered cabin she shared with her father, Elias. The frontier demanded resilience, courage, and a certain hardness of heart. Yet, within these walls, an invisible tension grew. A bond formed, one that defied the boundaries of family, a bond that could never see the light of day. As Clara grew, so did her awareness of Elias, not just as a guardian, not just as a father, but as a man whose presence stirred feelings she could neither name nor deny. The forest that once seemed to cage her now became a sanctuary for secret thoughts, whispered conversations, and stolen glances. It began in subtle ways. The way Elias would watch over her, always alert to the dangers lurking beyond the cabin, the howls of wolves, the sudden flash of a storm, the threats of a world far harsher than any of them imagined. And yet, these glances lingered longer than necessary, their touch brushed by the tiniest of hesitations. Clara stopped calling him Pa. The word felt heavy now, binding in ways neither could escape. Instead, she called him Elias. And in the same quiet rebellion, he whispered to her, My Clara! A phrase that carried the weight of all their unspoken truths. There were no vows, no witnesses, no papers to sign. And yet, in the silence of the frontier night, they considered themselves bound. The world beyond the forest could never know, and if it did, the consequences would be unthinkable. They moved carefully, learning the rhythms of their secret, protecting the fragile bond that had grown from necessity into something unshakable, something deeply human. Their love was neither lawful nor accepted, but it was undeniable. In the broader landscape of the American frontier, such bonds were rare but not unheard of. Life in isolation often warped the rules of morality and kinship, bending them under the pressure of survival. Children became helpers, companions, sometimes even confidants in ways unimaginable in the city's back east. Yet Clara and Elias' connection transcended companionship. It touched the forbidden edges of human desire. The frontier was a place of freedom, yes, but also of judgment. One whispered rumor could ruin lives. The wilderness protected them, but society's gaze was always lurking, waiting to cast its condemnation. Every touch, every shared meal, every moment of quiet intimacy carried weight. The forest, once a boundary, had become a shield. Here, amid the rustling leaves and the distant calls of wild creatures, Clara and Elias found a world where they could exist as they were, either fully father and daughter, nor simply lovers, but something undefinable, sacred in its secrecy. They knew they were treading a dangerous path. They knew the frontier offered freedom, but not absolution. And yet, the human heart is a force of nature, unpredictable, unstoppable, and in some ways, unstoppable even by the harshest morality. Clara's youth and Elias' age, the fragile lines of family and desire, all blurred in the glow of the hearth. Each day brought new challenges: survival, the wild, and the ever-present knowledge that their secret could never be revealed. And yet, it is in these forbidden moments that the human spirit reveals its complexity, its depth, and sometimes, its defiance of the world's rules. The frontier was not just a landscape of trees and rivers. It was a crucible for the human soul, testing, shaping, and sometimes breaking it. Clara and Elias lived in that crucible, bound not by law, not by society, but by the quiet, indestructible truth of their hearts. Their story remains a whisper in the annals of frontier history, a tale of love and taboo, survival and secrecy, and the courage to exist in the face of impossible odds. In the wilderness, they were free. In each other, they were whole. And in that secret bond, they found a fleeting, fragile eternity. Some stories are too dangerous to tell, yet too human to forget. Clara and Elias are one of those stories, a forbidden love, hidden in the heart of the frontier, where the rules of the world fell away, leaving only the truth of two hearts intertwined. The year is 1857. The western frontier stretches far and wide, rolling hills, untamed forests, and rivers carving paths through lands still wild and raw. Life here is hard, honest, and unforgiving. Every settler fights for survival, yet within these hardships, hearts dare to love, sometimes in ways that defy the very rules that govern their lives. Today, our story unfolds in a remote valley, where one family carries a secret so fragile, so dangerous, that its exposure could destroy them all. Clara had grown up in this valley, strong as the oaks lining the river banks, yet soft and tender as the wild flowers she tended. Elias, her father and now her husband in a bond born from secrecy and necessity, watched her every move. Their love had been hidden for years, whispered only in stolen glances and quiet moments in the shadows of their home. But secrets on the frontier are as dangerous as the land itself. And today, those whispers might reach ears that should never hear them. A traveling peddler, tired from the road, stops by the valley. His cart creaks under the weight of bolts of cloth, jars of spices, and trinkets that promise distant wonders. But he carries more than goods. He carries stories, rumors from towns and settlements far beyond the frontier. Good folk. News from the east. A preacher's coming to settle a church in the valley. They say he speaks sternly of God's laws, and man's laws too. Men have been punished for marrying too young, or too close of kin. Careful now, the world outside doesn't forget such things. Elias listened in silence, the words of the peddler striking deep into his chest. The storm of fear and longing he had buried for years now raged inside him. Clara, unaware that her father and husband shared a name, a role, and a secret, shivered as if the air itself had turned cold. Could love survive in a land ruled by the rigid laws of men? Could their forbidden bond withstand the scrutiny of outsiders and the judgments of strangers? They had fought for this love in whispers and shadows. Every stolen touch, every quiet embrace, had been their rebellion against a world that would never understand them. And yet, their hearts had hardened and softened in equal measure, shaped by the wilderness around them. Now, the peddler's words threatened to pull the veil from their lives. A preacher with a sharp eye, a community ready to judge, could they endure the weight of the frontier's law? Clara's thoughts drifted like the river outside her window. The laws of men, the whispers of neighbors, the coming preacher, all loomed like storm clouds over the fragile haven they had built. She wondered, with a pang of fear, whether the love that had grown quietly in the valley could survive under the harsh light of scrutiny. But love, once sown in the soil of the heart, is not easily uprooted. Even as rumors from afar reached their quiet valley, Clara and Elias knew that their bond, dangerous though it might be, had already endured the greatest trials of all. The frontier was a land of danger and beauty, of opportunity and lawlessness. In its wild expanses, hearts could be broken, lives reshaped, and secrets unearthed. For Clara and Elias, the winds of change had begun to blow. And though the valley had kept them hidden for years, soon they would learn that even the most remote frontier could not shield them forever. Love and fear now walked hand in hand, and the question remained, would the frontier protect them, or would it demand the price of their secret? The year is 1849. The western frontier stretches endlessly, a wild tapestry of towering trees, untamed rivers, and endless grasslands. Life here is raw, unforgiving, and isolated. Every shadow hides danger. Every rustle in the wind could carry a whisper of the unknown, and in this remote wilderness, there exists a family bound by secrets, love, and a darkness that defies the world's law. Clara and Elias have carved out a life at the edge of civilization. Their cabin, humble but sturdy, stands as a fortress against the chaos of the frontier. But even here, peace is fragile. One crisp autumn evening, as the golden sun dips below the horizon, Elias ventures into the woods, rifle in hand, searching for deer to feed them through the coming winter. The forest whispers around him, each branch snapping underfoot, each leaf fluttering like a warning. Then he sees it. A figure, distant but unmistakable, watching the cabin from a ridge. Their gaze pierces the trees, unmoving, silent. Elias steps forward, curiosity and unease warring within him. When he approaches, the figure vanishes into the shadows, swallowed by the forest's endless depths. Back at the cabin, Clara senses the shift. Her instincts, honed by years surviving the frontier's harshness, prick at the edges of fear. Elias, do you think the peddler might have told someone about us? She asks, voice barely above a whisper. Elias, masking the dread curling in his chest, shakes his head. No one will dare interfere, he assures her. This land, it's ours to defend. But deep inside, he feels the truth gnawing at him. The frontier is changing. Civilization is creeping westward. The law, once distant and impotent, now edges closer. With it comes judgment. And some truths, no matter how hidden, cannot escape forever. Their love was never meant to exist. Clara, once the child of this family, became more than that. She became a forbidden wife, a secret that had to remain buried. The forest had been their shield, the isolation their ally. But secrets, like seeds, grow quietly and insistently, reaching for the light. Every stolen moment, every whispered promise, carries weight. And every day, the world outside grows closer, ready to tear it all apart. That night, the shadows in the woods moved differently. The wind carries whispers, and the trees seem to lean closer, curious, watchful. Elias cannot shake the feeling that they are being observed. And perhaps, not just by wandering strangers, but by the very hand of fate poised to strike. The frontier is beautiful, harsh, and merciless. It tests hearts, bends minds, and exposes the truth hidden beneath every family secret. And in this wilderness, Clara and Elias must navigate not only the law and the land, but the forbidden love that binds them against a world that would never forgive it. As night falls, the forest swallows the light. The ridge stands empty, or so it seems. The frontier watches, silent and eternal. In a land where law and morality are only beginning to arrive, the family's secret endures. For now, but the shadows are patient. And soon, the world will demand its reckoning. The wind had been restless all week, carrying with it the dry, biting dust of the late summer plains. By the 9th season of their frontier life, Clara and Elias had grown used to silence. It was safer that way. Safer not to be noticed. Safer to remain a shadow among the scattered cabins and wind-bent trees. But on this morning, the rhythm of their quiet world broke. A lone rider appeared at the edge of the property. His horse, slick with sweat, kicked up the hard earth as he drew near. The man was draped in a dark coat, the kind more suited to a city street than the ragged edges of the prairie. His hat brim cut a sharp shadow across his eyes, and under one arm he carried a small, leather-bound folder, stuffed with papers. He reined in by the porch and spoke with a voice that was polite, but searching. "Morning. Name's Harlan Pierce. I've been sent to take the census. Just a formality, of course." Elias stepped forward slowly, his hand resting casually, but purposefully, on the butt of the rifle leaning against the porch rail. He did not invite the man inside. Clara stayed back in the doorway, her hands curled into her skirt. The stranger's eyes moved between them in a way that made the air feel colder. "I'll just need to confirm a few details," Pierce said, pulling a pencil from behind his ear. "Was the young lady here born in this county?" Elias did not look at Clara. "She's my ward," he said evenly, the lie smooth from years of practice. "Parents passed during the winter sickness years back. I took her in." Pierce wrote something on his paper, slowly, deliberately. "And your name again, sir?" "Elias Cutter." There was a long pause. The wind lifted the edge of Pierce's coat, revealing the polished grip of a revolver at his hip. He asked no more questions about crops, acreage, or livestock, just names, dates, and bloodlines. His gaze lingered on Clara in a way she could not read. Finally, he tipped his hat. "Well, that should be all. Thank you for your time. But as he mounted his horse, Clara saw it, a flicker of something in his eyes. Not suspicion. Not exactly. Something more dangerous, curiosity. The horse's hooves faded into the distance, but the unease remained. That night, Clara could not sleep. The darkness of the cabin felt heavier, every creak of the timbers a whisper of danger. She dreamed of the stranger's voice calling her name. She dreamed of hands dragging her away from the only life she had known, away from Elias, away from the cabin, away from the careful story they had built together. In the dream, Elias stood still as she was pulled into the shadows, his face unreadable. By morning, she was pale and silent. Elias tried to reassure her, telling her men like Pierce pass through and are never seen again. But deep down, they both knew better. A man who asks questions like that doesn't just leave. He comes back, and next time, he won't be alone. The year is deep in the 1850s. The frontier is not merely a place, it is a state of isolation, a living, breathing expanse of cold silence and unbroken snow. For most, it is a land of opportunity. For Elias and Clara, it is a hiding place. Snow comes early that year. Thick, wet flakes blanket the earth before the leaves have even finished their fall. The wind sweeps down from the north, whistling through the cracks in the cabin walls like the voice of some ghostly preacher warning them of sins unspoken. Outside, the world turns white, but inside the cabin, the air is heavy with unspoken fears and forbidden warmth. They rarely leave the safety of the cabin now. Elias keeps to his chores in silence, chopping wood, mending traps, tending to the meager stores of dried meat and root vegetables. But his rifle is never far from reach. It leans beside his chair, its metal cold and ready. Not for wolves, though their howls thread through the long nights, but for men. Men with iron badges, paper warrants, and righteous eyes. Clara spends her hours by the small table in the corner, the one beneath the single frost-coated window. She keeps a journal, not the sort to record weather and crop yield like other frontier wives, but one written in tiny, hurried script, as if the words themselves are dangerous. In it she writes of their days, their whispered conversations, their long silences, and the love that binds them. A love that cannot be spoken aloud in any town or church, for it is both her comfort and their shared damnation. Sometimes she writes about her dreams, dreams of being far away, where no one knows them, where no one cares what they are to each other. But more often, she writes about her fears. She fears the crack of boots on snow outside their door. She fears the knock that will not be a neighbor's greeting but the beginning of an ending. At night, when the fire burns low and the cold seems to creep through the very bones of the cabin, Elias lies awake, listening. Wolves cry out in the distance, lean, desperate beasts searching for food. Yet it is not them he fears. His mind is haunted by a different predator, the law. Not the wild, ungoverned kind of justice that rules the frontier, but the slow, suffocating grip of men who believe that what they do is righteous. Men who would drag Clara away from him and strip her of his name, and strip him of his life. The days grow shorter. The darkness stretches longer. The wind sometimes screams like a living thing across the frozen plains. There are moments when even the two of them seem to question whether they have trapped themselves here, together, in a cage of their own making. But then Elias will glance at her by the fire, hair lit with a copper glow, and he knows. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, he would rather die in this frozen wilderness than live in a world that denies her to him. Clara's journal fills page after page, the ink freezing in its well if she pauses too long. She hides it beneath a loose floorboard, praying no one will ever read it, yet knowing that if it were found, their truth would be laid bare for all to see. Outside, the snow piles high against the cabin walls, muting the world into silence. It is beautiful and suffocating. Each flake falls like a reminder, the frontier gives no mercy. And neither does the LAW.in the winter of fear. Love is their only fire. But fires, no matter how fiercely they burn, cannot hold back the night forever. The spring wind blew restless that morning, carrying with it the sharp scent of thawed earth and the distant promise of rain. Out on the edge of the vast frontier, Elias was splitting wood near the cabin, his shirt sleeves rolled up, each swing of the axe echoing like a warning drumbeat. Inside, Clara was mending a tear in her dress, her hands moving in quiet rhythm, but her mind felt anything but calm. The long winter had passed, yet shadows still lingered over their lives, shadows cast not by the mountains or the clouds, but by whispers traveling through distant towns. By midday, the stillness was broken. The sound of hooves, 2 horses, drawing closer. Elias set the axe down, his jaw tightening. Clara came to the door, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes searching the horizon. Over the ridge appeared 2 figures on horseback. One wore a worn leather coat and carried the dust of a long journey on his shoulders. The other, a lawman. His badge caught the sunlight in a sharp flash of gold. They dismounted in the yard without a word, dust swirling around their boots. The deputy's voice was steady, but carried an edge of accusation. "Elias Harper?" he asked. Elias's hand brushed instinctively toward the hatchet stuck in the chopping block. "That's right," Elias answered, his voice low. "We've had a complaint," the deputy continued, "about the girl living here. Clara. Your arrangement." The pause before the last word was deliberate, designed to sting. Clara's face flushed with shame and anger, but she held her ground in the doorway. Elias stepped forward, blocking the lawman's view of her. "She's my family," Elias said, his voice like stone. "She's also your wife, according to some," the deputy replied coldly. "And that's a matter the law can't ignore." Elias's eyes narrowed. "The law out here," he said, "ain't the same as the law in your towns. Out here, survival writes its own rules." The man beside the deputy, broad-shouldered, with a scar down his cheek, took a step closer. His hand brushed the butt of his revolver. "You'll hand her over," he said flatly, "or we'll take her." Elias moved like a striking rattlesnake, stepping between them. "No one's taking her from me." What happened next came fast, too fast for thought. The scarred man lunged forward. Elias swung the hatchet's wooden handle up, knocking the revolver from his grip. The deputy shouted, reaching for his sidearm, but Clara's cry cut through the chaos. Elias twisted, grappling with the scarred man, the 2 men crashing into the muddy yard. A shot rang out, sharp and deafening. The scarred man dropped to his knees, clutching his leg, the ground darkening beneath him. The deputy's eyes widened, half with shock, half with rage. He backed away, his horse shuffling nervously. "This isn't over, Harper," he spat, climbing into the saddle. "We'll be back, and we won't be alone." He wheeled his horse and thundered off, the wounded man limping after him. Elias stood there, chest heaving, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the spring air. Clara ran to him, her hands trembling as they touched his face. "They'll come back, Elias," she whispered. "I know," he said, glancing toward the horizon where the deputy had vanished. "Then we'll be ready." The sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, a sound both warning and promise. Out here on the frontier, danger didn't knock twice. It came back with a vengeance. And Elias knew the next time they came, it wouldn't just be a fight for Clara, it would be a fight for both their lives. The cold morning air carried a strange stillness, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The cabin they had once called home now stood silent behind them, its walls soaked in too many whispers, too many secrets. There was no time for goodbyes. The news from the valley had traveled fast, too fast, and the murmur of approaching riders was enough to send them fleeing before dawn's first light. They packed quickly, with a desperation sharpened by fear. Food, blankets, and the old rifle, nothing more. Every item was chosen with care, for each extra pound meant slower steps on the narrow trails ahead. The rest of their life, the farm tools, the carved chairs, the cradle by the hearth, was left behind to be claimed by dust and memory. The path into the highlands was no road at all, but a maze of hidden deer trails known only to trappers and outlaws. Towering pines swallowed them, their shadows stretching like dark fingers across the frostbitten ground. The higher they climbed, the more the air thinned, the more the silence pressed in around them. Life became harder with every mile. There was no farm now, no roof overhead. Nights were spent beneath a quilt of stars, their fire little more than a flicker against the vast emptiness. The wind carried the howl of wolves, and sometimes, in the distance, the crack of falling ice echoed like distant gunfire. But in this wilderness, far from the eyes and judgment of the world, their bond, strange, forbidden, unspoken, seemed to grow even stronger. She moved beside him not as a child clings to a guardian, nor as a wife walks with a husband, but as something caught between, tethered by a thread neither of them could name, yet both could feel in the marrow of their bones. In the valley, such a bond had been poison. Here, in the ungoverned silence of the mountains, it felt like a truth too fierce to be denied. Each day was a fight for survival. They trapped rabbits, foraged for berries when the snow allowed, and kept the rifle loaded in case hunger drove a bear too close. Their clothes grew ragged, their faces leaner, but the cold only seemed to draw them closer at night, wrapped in the same blanket, sharing warmth not just from body heat, but from the strange, dangerous comfort of belonging to no one but each other. Yet, even here, the world had ways of reaching them. Tracks in the snow one morning, too large to be a deer, too fresh to be ignored, told them someone else was in these mountains. Whether hunter or lawman, they could not know. But they knew this: their flight was not over. The mountains could hide them for a time, but winter was closing in, and the frontier was a cruel master. Still, as they stood on a rocky outcrop, looking down at the endless sweep of pine and ice, they felt untouchable for just a moment. No preacher's words, no lawman's warrant, no neighbor's whisper could reach them here. Only the wind, the sky, and each other. But deep inside, they both knew, secrets do not vanish, even in the wild. They only sleep, waiting for the day they wake. The wind howled through the blackened skeletons of dead pine trees, carrying with it the bitter scent of coal dust and cold steel. Beyond the jagged cliffs, the coal mining camp squatted under the moonlight like a beast crouching in the dark, its chimneys belching smoke that curled into the endless winter sky. For months, Elias and Clara had been ghosts, moving from camp to camp, crossing rivers under the cover of darkness, leaving no footprints that could be followed. But the West had a cruel way of remembering its outlaws. And this night, under the pale, silver eye of the moon, the past had finally caught them. The bounty hunters came in silence, their boots sinking into the frozen mud, rifles glinting like fangs. They were not here to arrest Elias. No. Men like these didn't drag fugitives back in chains. They carried them back in pine boxes. Inside the ramshackle miner's hut, Clara felt it first, that unnatural stillness, the kind of silence where even the crickets hold their breath. She turned to Elias. His eyes met hers, and in them, she read everything. There would be no running this time. The first shot cracked the night open. A window shattered. Splinters rained over the table. Elias grabbed his Winchester, the stock worn smooth by years of desperate use, and threw himself to the ground. Clara was already moving, shoving the lantern to the floor so darkness swallowed the room. Shadows danced in the moonlight as the hunters closed in. Muzzle flashes erupted like lightning in a summer storm. Elias fired back, his shots precise, almost surgical. 2 of the men fell, one screaming, one silent, but not before a bullet tore through Elias's side, the impact spinning him into the wall. Clara was at his side instantly, her hands slick with his blood, the warmth leaving his body far too quickly. "We have to move," she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Elias tried to stand, his breath ragged, but the wound dragged him down. "No, you go," he rasped, but Clara shook her head violently. "You saved me when no one else would," she said, pressing her palm to his wound, feeling the frantic thud of his heart beneath her fingers. "You're not dying here, Elias. Not like this." With a strength born of desperation, Clara hauled him up, half carrying, half dragging him through the back of the hut into the frozen forest. Snow crunched underfoot, each step echoing like a drumbeat of survival. Behind them, the camp erupted into chaos: shouts, gunfire, the clang of boots against iron. Branches clawed at Clara's face, tore her dress, but she didn't stop. Every gasp from Elias felt like it could be his last. She pressed on, guided by the dim hope that the deeper they went, the safer they'd be. Somewhere in the darkness, Elias's voice broke through, weak but steady. "Clara, you don't have to, I do." She cut him off, her words sharp as the winter air. "I swore I'd never let you die. You're all I have." And in that moment, under the weight of blood, frost, and fear, the truth lay between them, twisted and undeniable. She was his daughter in name, his wife in secret, and his entire world in ways the rest of the world would never understand. The forest swallowed them whole, leaving only the sound of the wind and the fading echoes of gunfire behind. Whether the night would keep them safe, or claim them both, was a question the dawn would answer. The wind over the frontier has a voice of its own. It is the same wind that once carried the laughter of pioneers, the same wind that whispered through the tall prairie grass as wagon wheels creaked under the weight of hope and hardship. Now, in this chapter of our story, it carries something else: a memory, a warning, and the echo of a love that defied both blood and law. Elias never saw another spring. His life ended in the cold shadow of a mountain cave, snow drifting like slow, silent tears across the entrance. Inside, his head rested in Clara's lap. Her hands, once steady as a rifle, now trembled as they clung to him, feeling the warmth fade from his skin. She whispered his name, not as a wife, not as a daughter, but as both, bound by a love the world would never bless. When the stillness came, it was complete. The snow muffled every sound, sealing them away from the rest of the world. Clara knew she could not take him back to the settlement, not to be judged, not to be buried under the eyes of men who would write their own version of the truth. Instead, she chose a place only the frontier itself could keep secret. She carried him to a clearing where an ancient oak stood, a tree that had stood through generations of storms, droughts, and wars. Its roots reached deep into the earth, the same way their bond had reached deep into forbidden soil. She dug through the frozen ground until her hands bled. There, beneath the oak's silent branches, she laid Elias to rest. She carved his name into the bark with her own hunting knife, each stroke cutting deeper into the wood and her heart. The years that followed were long and lonesome. Clara did not return to the life she once knew. She stayed in the high ridges, building a small cabin near the oak. Seasons passed: springs of wildflowers, summers of rattlesnake heat, autumns painted in gold, and winters that froze the rivers into glass. Yet no matter the season, she always found her way back to the grave, her fingers tracing the carved letters as if touching his face. Travelers began to speak of her. They told of a gray-eyed woman who appeared on the ridgelines at dusk, watching from a distance. She never asked for company. She never sought food or shelter from others. She lived by hunting, trapping, and the small patch of earth she tilled for vegetables. Some said she was a widow who had lost her husband to the mountains. Others claimed she was the daughter of a trapper who had gone mad from grief. But the truth, the real truth, was something no one dared speak aloud. Over time, stories of Clara and the hidden grave became part of frontier legend. They said her cabin door was never locked, yet no one dared cross its threshold. They said she kept a single shawl folded on her bed, the same one Elias had given her, worn and frayed but never discarded. Some swore they had seen her on moonlit nights kneeling by the oak, her lips moving in silent prayer, her breath misting in the cold, and then, one day, the sightings stopped. Her cabin stood empty, the fire long cold. The grave remained untouched, but a second name had been carved into the oak beside Elias's. Some believed she had died there, alone, the winter claiming her in the same way it had claimed him. Others swore they saw her spirit wandering the ridges, the shawl trailing behind her like a banner in the wind, her gray eyes searching forever for something she could never find. The frontier kept its silence. The oak still stands, the names weathered but unbroken. And the wind still whispers, carrying a story of love that should never have been, and yet could never be undone. She was the daughter who became a wife, the wife who became a ghost, and the ghost who became a legend.